Welcome to this afternoon's session. It's the 3:15 session here. We're going to be talking about product experience plus marketing, the key to unlocking customer engagement. So we've got a terrific panel we've assembled here today, which we'll get to in just a moment. But really, our goal is to talk about what's changing out there for marketers in terms of the challenges that running up against to try to reach consumers and customers, particularly when they're out and about, mobile in a very different landscape than marketers have had to deal with sort of 10 plus years ago. As I said, a great panel here today. We've got experts from across user design, video, mobile advertising. So I think that each of these gentlemen will bring a perspective that will be helpful and informative. And we've taken the table out of the way so we can have a more intimate, hopefully, and potentially lively, dare I say, provocative discussion. Jeff threatened to do something to Giles, so we'll see if that transpires during the course of the panel. But what I'd ask right now, starting with Richard here, is to give a quick intro on their backgrounds, what they're doing currently at their jobs and with their businesses, how that plays into our topic, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. My name is Richard Banfield. I run a firm that builds user experiences on the web and in mobile. Our clients range from Intel and Walgreens all the way through to startups. And it's my perspective that the experience that you design is, in fact, your marketing.
Yes, Adam Tovum, VP of Business Development at JumpTap. JumpTap was founded in 2005. And we have a mobile audience platform that builds a unified audience for marketers across both PC and mobile. And we have really built that up over the years. It's now over 70,000 sites and apps. And it's become a phenomenal platform. I think about 171 million users in the US that marketers can reach as a mobile-first solution, and work with all kinds of agencies, brands, direct marketers, both managed services and via programmatic, and really focus these days on that unified audience. Also, we've announced that we've agreed to be acquired by Millennial Media, and that transaction has not officially closed, but that's also making for very exciting times in mobile advertising.
Nice. Giles Phillips, Chief Product Designer at Constant Contact, and really excited to be here to talk about some of these topics today between marketing, messaging, and how they infuse into the product experience. The product experience is where I spend obviously a lot of my own time thinking, designing, formulating strategies, and it's just a really compelling place to be working right now because it's such a constantly shifting landscape, and it sort of it sort of emphasizes how important it is to be very lean and sort of learn as you go, as you roll out new strategies.
And I'm Jeff Watcott, Chief Marketing Officer at Brightcove. We provide a cloud platform that helps digital marketers and media companies manage, distribute, and monetize video content across the web, mobile web, native apps, and also on smart televisions, gaming consoles, social platforms, and so forth. And so I think a lot of what we help organizations do on a regular basis is about get their content in front of the right consumer in the right way, in the right time, with the right context wrapped around it in a branded way. And I think there'll be some interesting discussions about that topic today.
Great, terrific setup. So I think as we try to set the context here, our very first sentence in the setup for our panel today: gone are the days of banner ads and traditional marketing messaging. I guess I'd say to the panel first, is that true? And if so, why? What has changed that would cause us to say that gone are the days of traditional marketing messaging? And what happened to banner ads? It seemed like they worked really well online.
Well, JumpTap over the last 8 years has really focused on making sure that when marketers are reaching their audience through mobile, that they're doing it in a way that is not just about shrinking the banner ad down into a smartphone or feature phone sized experience. It's really about thinking about a tablet thinking about a smartphone as a creative palette, where TV and even to a great extent the desktop desktop ad experience is very much leaning back, watching what's there on the page. There's a lot of clutter. With mobile, it's a lot more about lean forward and interact with the content, interact with the ads. So making the ads a rich media experience, making them immersive, anything that involves touching, swiping, voice recognition. It allows you to touch and feel a branded experience, and it brings the user much closer to whatever marketing message they're engaging with. And so you may launch into that ad experience from a straight up banner. There's plenty of banners sized inventory available in mobile, but what you do and how you interact with the user once they're inside that ad unit, that's where I think people need to change their mindset, and we've done some amazing things with marketers over the years. We can talk about that a little more, but you know, mobile and tablets very much lean forward and interactive.
Yeah, another thing I think is really interesting about mobile is that it's such an intensely personal device when you think about a mobile device compared to a desktop or a PC where people had a much sort of less personal relationship to the device. It's closely tethered to them. It's a very delicate space that you're entering into when you're thinking about advertising to someone on mobile, because when you sort of step back and sort of look at why they're using those mobile devices, it's 91% of internet access on a mobile device is for communication purposes. And it makes it really interesting to think, for me, to think about, what are the different types of goals that you have with the injection of some sort of ad or messaging. Certainly there's the immediate desire to generate a click or a tap or some form of interaction, but there's also the sort of longer play of on increasingly social platforms, things like word of mouth marketing and sort of less closed loop ways of establishing your brand. The user may not be ready to act on it at that particular moment in time because they might be doing something else or distracted because they're texting while driving or never know what.
The original banner
I'm
model.
not condoning that.
Yeah.
I never do it.
Please don't do that. But the original banner model was built around this notion of people in web browsers. They're looking at content. You're going to distract their attention, and you're going to get them to click, and they're going to go do something. That's just not what's going on in mobile most of the time. And the most rare commodity on earth is true love. But the next most rare is consumer attention. That's what we're all trying to get, is consumer attention. And if you look at where the eyeballs are moving and the time spent in the digital world, people are spending a growing and now very, very significant amount of their time on mobile devices. But the interaction model is totally different. You're not going to get away with the traditional banner-centric model there. You've got to engage them on their own terms. And since it is such a personal device and it's space in your pocket and in that precious time, you can't use the normal interrupt model.
I think that's a really good point. Sorry.
So I've got a slightly different perspective, but I think it resonates with what you're saying, and that is, it's not really about the device. It's nothing to do with mobile, the device. It's got to do with mobile, the state. Moving around, being mobile, the mobility of the individual is what we as marketers now have an opportunity to take advantage of. What was the thing you said earlier? The
seducible moment.
The seducible moment, right?
Seducible moment. That's right.
That seducible moment now happens where the event or the trigger is likely to be, versus the desktop experience, which is this weird little throne that we've created where we sit in front of this thing and it sends us messages. That's completely out of context. Now we have the opportunity to talk to that consumer and create a seducible moment in that moment where they're actually having that experience. So you've all had that notification reach you where you drive past a Starbucks and that Starbucks thing pops up and says, hey, there's a Starbucks here. Now suddenly I feel like a coffee. Up until that very second I didn't feel like a coffee. Now I've got to have one, right? So that mobility is not a device or a technology, it's a state of being. And the marketers in this room need to think about the biology of the individual in that mobile state and forget about the device, because in 10 years' time, we won't even own our own devices. They'll be shared, just like bicycles are and buildings are and streets are. We won't need to carry our own personal devices on. So I agree with you that it's personal now, but in 10 or 20 years' time, devices will be access points like bicycles are on the streets today.
Right.
It's a good point, and I'm glad Richard brought it up from the device, because what we see is that if you really focus on the user, if you know who that user is, it's ultimately, yes, mobile's got all these great new shifts, move to a new platform, et cetera, but ultimately you're still talking about a fundamental need for the marketer to connect with their audience, to connect with a person, a user. And what we see is about following that person, understanding their behavior. And more people are starting the experience on, say, a desktop, and then they're moving over into the living room on the sofa on a tablet while they're watching TV, and then they complete it when they're out and about on the mobile phone. Like you said, they're on the move, they're going by a Starbucks. And we've actually seen, measuring year over year, 160% increase year over year of folks who are starting on one platform.
Are you seeing any substitution? I mean, for example, I think maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I had one device. Now I've got 5. My kids, again, I have 7 or 8 or whatever. I think there's more devices being produced than people being born on the planet. So in your data, do you see any substitution effect where are you just aggregating the devices or the access points that you have in your life? Or are you saying, oh, I got a new one, I'm going to get rid of everything else?
I think you're seeing a fundamental shift. You're not only offloading more of your experience from what was an almost exclusively desktop experience into these fragmented platforms, but you are also taking what used to be one unified experience, not to pick on Yahoo, but one of the original portals. There was a unified engagement experience between you and Yahoo and all the many services that were on or affiliated with yahoo.com. Now, take all of the consumption and the communication you were talking about and distribute it across 10 to 20, even 30 apps. And so what you find is you're really lacking for user attention. So the ability to build a longitudinal profile about that user is that much more challenged. And it's one of the reasons why JumpTap about 4+ years ago made an extensive investment in bringing third-party data, bringing offline data in a very privacy-sensitive way into our mobile platform so that we could really inform marketers with how to better understand the user, the offline behavior. Do they have a lease on their car, their Toyota brand car coming up in the next 90 days? What has been bought in grocery stores? What are people buying from offline catalogs? So really taking all of that, making sure it's all, there's never any personally identifiable information within the platform, but using it as a way to better understand people, because they are radically changing how they consume content. And we were even talking earlier, Jeff was talking about something like Angry Birds. I mean, it's a great platform. It's probably a good segue.
Well, so I mean, Rovio is a very fascinating company that one of our customers. But who here plays Angry Birds or has played Angry Birds at some point? Yeah, so everybody's got it installed. And
everybody else is lying.
Yeah, exactly. And if you went down to the younger kids and so forth, I mean, everybody has experienced that game, and they started out as a game. But then they now actually have more of their revenue from licensing the game characters out for other things as a company. So they become a diversified media company. And then about 6 to 9 months ago, they changed fundamentally the experience in the game. So when you open up the game now, the first thing that you see is actually Toons, Angry Bird Toons, which is original short feature cartoon content featuring the characters in Angry Birds. And then you have to click to go get to the game. But they start with that content. And just in the first few months of launch of that, they did over 1 billion views of that content. So this is a company that's been able to aggregate an audience of 1 billion installs. They've been able to get 1 billion views in just a couple months of original branded content that they're delivering out to an audience, completely unrelated to the film industry, to the television industry, to the newspaper industry, any of our traditional media models, and I think it's really an interesting this demonstration of the power that this new platform can offer.
I think it's a great example to highlight about how we were talking about the changing consumption there, because if you think about it, most people think of Angry Birds, it's a wildly successful app, all the kids play it, everybody's starting to recognize the characters and the brand, the future Disney. But if you take a step back and think about the economics of what you were just talking about, they've got 1.7 billion downloads out there. So think about that. Effectively 1.7 billion TV sets that you can deliver a message to. You've got about 400 monthly active users globally who are interacting with that experience and consuming that media. And then as a marketer, to have the economics set up where you could take that message right down to the user without you're not dealing with the cable companies, you're sort of highlighting that piece of it. You're just taking that straight to the user. So I think there's a real opportunity for these global distribution platforms via what we think of as apps, but if you think about everybody sitting around the living room sharing it as a family, it's really what the television set was to the 1950s. That's what Angry Birds and these future app platforms are, I think, to the family living room and the century.
This might be a question for Jeff, but doesn't that make them less like Disney and more like Netflix?
Well, yes and no. Yes in that they have a convenient audience and they're delivering content to them on a regular basis, but it's not a subscription type model. At least they haven't gone to that yet. They're really looking at putting advertising into that content and cross-promoting other apps and other brands to try to really stir the pot and build that up. Now, not every CMO or digital marketing manager in the room here is going to go launch an Angry Birds style application. But it's really interesting to think about what the possibilities are if you could come up with an app strategy where you could provide an application with content or information that was sufficiently compelling that you could get that installed base. The power of being able to convene that audience on a regular basis and push out 1.7 billion push notifications to say the new series of Toons is now here and the premiere is tonight, come watch. That's really powerful stuff.
You guys have that business as well, right? You have an installed base of people who want to hear from you all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really resonates into our business very well, because when you think about, that as a channel for engaging an existing set of customers and helping them to discover new and different ways to leverage the assets that they might be creating through you or consuming through Angry Birds, that very much applies to our world, right? And so, when we look at our product experiences, we think about, what can we do within the workflow optimization of the UX within those products to really help drive utilization, to drive engagement, which is the most succinct and clear way to sort of flesh out some of the fuzzy areas or the gray areas around what our value proposition is. So it's really, there's a handshake from that initial acquisition marketing effort that might have happened to get somebody into your base of customers, but then really sort of pick up where that left off and fill in some of the details through interacting with your products.
And to answer your question, if Netflix had its own in-house production for everything that they were, for Orange is the New Black or whatever, and they also bought EA Games and brought that in and put that off of Netflix.com,
they would be that. Yeah.
Then they would be that. But I think that's where the power of this media experience is. It's not just pure video entertainment, and it's not just games that are family friendly that everyone from 3 to 93 can play. It's really about bringing that all together.
I saw something the other day that was considerably less sexy than those birds jumping around, but it was kind of an interesting micro example of this. It was an app that was by a drug company. I think it was Flonase was the app, but it was for allergy sufferers. And it was an app that you install, and based on your location and the types of allergies that you enter in, it'll send you a push notification when it's going to be a bad day, and when you're in a location where you're going to have bad reactions. So kind of mundane, unless you really suffer from allergies. And it was totally branded, but it was actually a really useful application that was contextualized and took advantage of the functionality that's available on a mobile device to actually get real estate in the consumer's lives around a topic that's important to that brand. I think that's smart.
So in all of these cases, we're talking about watching content, looking at content, just consuming it in general, but we're talking about a divergence of devices as opposed to, or screens, as opposed to a convergence, which when I was a young lad, everybody talked about convergence as the miracle thing. I mean, it seems like we're going exactly the opposite direction, where we're going to more and more portals or access points than ever before. What's the next generation of this? I mean, is it just going to be more complicated? Do these guys have to go home now because they're too scared?
If you're a marketer and you believe in that unified profile, and I mean, mobile, we were talking before about how personal device it is, so it stands to reason that the profile that you build up around a mobile view into the consumer can be one of the more persistent and also more accurate, because it's more likely to be one-to-one user to device. But if you find them, if you believe in that unified profile, and if you think about your audience that you're trying to connect with as both, not just PC, but also tablet and smartphone and other connected TVs and devices that are out there, then there are more and more, there are these frictionless ways to reach that user, just think about it via the connected profile, and especially as more of the mobile ad inventory moves out onto the exchanges, being able to build that cross-device map and just say, you know what, I am going to find my audience, I know them well, and I'm going to bind it to the map, and then let the exchange, let the jump taps of the world find the user wherever they are.
I think it's really interesting when you think about sort of a unified strategy for content delivery across all these different types of touch points that we're talking about. And it's sort of, in my mind, it's kind of an interesting inflection point where maybe, is it content is king anymore, or is it context is king? Sort of context optimization against those individual touch points, understanding the particular things that the user is concerned about and what particular things you might have at your disposal to do things like assert your brand, assert your value. We talked some about, building out an iOS, app experience and the relatively discrete and constrained set of components that you have to work with there to really establish a brand. I mean, you certainly have well-established platform interaction design. But it leaves you with only a few things. You have a color palette, you have icons that you can work with, you have the way that you introduce your language into those experiences. But it's really, I think it sort of forces you to look at a particular context, understand what the user is trying to do, and then look at the building blocks that you have that you can leverage to sort of assert a brand in the simplest way possible so that it can span across those different contexts.
It's a really important point because I think, content is always going to be the where it all starts. You've got to have great, engaging content to get the consumer attention in the first place. But the context is essential, especially in a mobile environment, because, if you just dump your video content, for example, out into YouTube and this ocean of content, and people are in the YouTube app and they're searching around, they might find your content, they might not. But if they do, they're going to watch it. But then the next video they watch, because of the context in which they're watching it in the YouTube app or on the YouTube site, you have no control over what's going to happen next. You just don't. And so YouTube is actually oriented to not keep people feasting on your content, but to keep people feasting on whatever they think they should be watching. And so it's not to say that YouTube is a bad thing, but it's like if you've gone through all that effort to get consumer attention, putting a little more effort into getting them into a context where the next click you can help keep them on brand and keep them engaged with what you're doing is essential. And that requires a little bit of different approach to technology and some forethought, but it is powerful when you get it right.
I'm going to take a crack. So, awesome panel. I think that makes me think of something talking about that, which is, so where is this? We're talking about product experience plus marketing, and Angry Bird sounds like it's product experience is marketing, is content, is channel, right? So it gets pretty confusing. I think people generally have been talking about, for marketers, delivering across all these channels, delivering on these devices, right? What works better? Is it, brand marketing in some cases works fine, but it's direct response in other cases. It's sort of these old marketing paradigms applied to just hitting people at different places on different devices. and I really hear you guys saying something quite different, which is, the consumer intent, and activity is very different in these different areas. It sort of goes to the human factors piece. It also makes me think from a marketing standpoint, do we need to think about a campaign just not being delivered across a set of channels and sort of fit to the screen size? And but it needs to be a campaign might be different in different parts of the channel because there's this cross-channel sort of customer life cycle angle on this whole thing where you're doing different pieces of a campaign on different channels.
That notion of like multi-channel, I'm going to reach everybody on all the different channels, that's a very pushy type model, And that's kind of 20th century, really. I mean, when you think about it. If you think about the customer journey, there's a time when you're trying to build awareness and that first level, get that first engagement. And the best way in a mobile world where all the attention is on mobile devices is to think about not the device you're trying to reach them on, but what mode of operation for the consumer are you trying to reach them in? Because there's times when people are in seek mode. They are searching in the mobile web for information about things they're interested in. And that's where your SEM strategy and your SEO strategy and your mobile optimization strategy for your mobile website comes in, because that's the web as we know it, and people are searching. And you got to be ready to deliver your content to them when they're in that seek mode. But once they're beyond that seek mode and they know your brand and they have a relationship with you, then there's an opportunity to get them to install an app. And an app, getting them to install an app you're asking a favor. You're asking for space in their life, and you have no right to ask for that unless you have something to offer them. And that means you can have a relationship. But if you can get them to do that, then you have all this additional power, push message capability. You've got that permanent real estate in their lives. So that's a different phase than awareness. That's more about loyalty and cultivating that ongoing relationship. And so I think about different modes that the consumer might be in and then hit that, as opposed to just, I'm going to push my stuff everywhere.
There's a broader context as well, right? That those companies that don't have big money to spend on an awareness campaign, that are starting small, need to enter with the product. That's where their money's got to go. They've got to build a great product experience, and then that will result in loyalty and brand connection. So brand in its true form as opposed to identity, where it's like, hey, I had a great experience. I want to be talking to other people about this. This is a remarkable thing that I need to share with other people. I think that the bigger companies that can enter with awareness and say, hey, we're going to broadcast this. There's this thing that we have. You should go and see it. That is a little bit 20th century, but they still have the ability to do that. And I remember we had a client say to us that they had read that Steve Jobs says, never listen to what the consumer says because they don't know what they want. And I think that's fine if you're Steve Jobs and you've got $25 billion in cash and you have a brand that's recognized worldwide. You can be that arsehole. You can be really bold about it. But if you're the guy who's got some seed funding and you're starting a new company, or you're a small company and you're spinning off a new product, you don't have that. You've got to build an unbelievable product because that experience will inform the brand, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of the interplay between the product experiences and how they sort of fill in the gaps and demonstrate the value in the most tangible way that really helps the user understand and then start to advocate for you, right? And sort of thinking beyond, again, sort of those initial primitive mechanics of, is it all about the taps and the clicks, or is it more about, what you can do to really resonate with somebody on a functional, emotional, social level so that they can become an advocate for you?
Yeah, and I think Jeff talked about sort of entering into their space. They're downloading an app. There really has to be a value exchange there, right? They're taking the time to either go download it. They're taking the time to watch your ad, interact with your ad unit, your brand. And so being able to make that value exchange clear to them is important. And if we're talking about reaching the right user and really understanding that connected profile, part of that trust is making sure that you treat their privacy very carefully. You're giving them clear notice and choice, especially when you're gathering sensitive personal information, when you're gathering even just location, something as straightforward as a 5-digit zip code, just making people aware, giving them clear notice about what the first-party data is being used for, and then a choice if they want to opt out of that. Because one of the things we've found is that, especially when you start to talk about mobile, you're challenged by the screen real estate, about how much you can communicate to the user and make them aware of what's being done with their data. You also have to be very clear about the choice mechanisms, especially with a lot of the device identifiers that can persist information, but at the same time, a lot of statistical and behavioral identifiers that are being built about the user across different profiles and can degrade over time. So you really want to make sure, if you are going to persist the information, you also persist the ability for them to opt out of that. It's a big part of that trust mechanism. The DAA, fortunately, has, we have a whole set now of mobile advertising guidelines that we just launched over the last year. So
it's getting kind of interesting out there. I mean, I have owned every iPhone since the very first one, and every one I've done an upgrade process, and it's always gone pretty smoothly. But I just got a 5S, and there was some problem with the upgrade process, and I didn't have to install it as a completely new device, but I had to go through a bunch of rigmarole. But basically, I had to go and reconstruct all of the identity and interconnectedness between the apps on the device and re-authenticate, because I got two-factor everything, nowadays. But it really made me aware of how much information I have poured into this device and given to people, and how interconnected all these apps are. Like, this app's authenticated by this app, and so forth. And it's kind of scary, actually.
So I want to talk about this, because privacy is something you are excited about. Do we really want privacy?
Sadly.
Because the behavior that we exhibit points to the fact that we are not really that interested in privacy. We may advocate for it and represent ourselves as looking for it, but we see a generation. You guys got kids?
Yeah,
I got kids. They don't give a shit about privacy. They're sharing in a way that I find completely, nerve-wracking.
Well, it's interesting, right? We've all told Mark Zuckerberg on one level that we care about it because people get incensed when privacy policies are updated on Facebook, but at the same time, people still come back to Facebook. They continue to use it. And to your point, there's this inverse correlation between age and your propensity to share disturbingly everything about your life.
But even our generation, I mean, Jeff's just talking about multiple devices that he's sharing information with. Right. That it's going to just get more.
But I think part of the fear, part of the uproar that you hear is that everyone talks about in product design, it's privacy by design. Build it in at every step of the way. But when you look at how people react in the marketplace, it's privacy by disaster. Oh my gosh, what has Path done with my contact list? And nobody sits back and is educated enough about it to say, you know what, if my contact list were hashed and nobody could ever find out about it, and it was just anonymous unique identifiers in my contact list, okay, so someone creates some unique, call it, a fingerprint, although, the marketing people would never call it a fingerprint, but call it some print of my device. As long as I can reset that anytime I want, as long as it doesn't tie to where I am in terms of location, why not be able to create this value exchange between the marketer and the user such that you're getting highly relevant content, ads, experiences in exchange for nothing that really exposes anything about you. You could be a 35-year-old male and market to buy a Toyota hybrid in the next 90 days, but if nobody knows where you are in the country, except at the moment they're delivering the ad, if nobody knows anything else about you and can't find you, can't track you down, how intrusive is that if you are properly educated about it? And we have a very long way to go before we educate users about it, but I think there's a need for people to be more educated about the privacy, and also for organizations to be fully accountable for how they make use of, even though it's non-person identifiable information, you have to be a real white hat user of that data.
Right. Yeah, and it's certainly the accountability is really critical on the privacy front, but going back to some of the examples that you were giving in terms of the way that your kids interact, and it'll be probably a really interesting moment for you when they start using social encoding in Facebook to conceal some of the messaging that they do from you, so that you don't have. Has that already happened?
Snapchat.
What's really interesting about the social channels is that it spans. It's very different across generations, but certainly with the younger generations, certainly the amount of establishment of their own sense of self that occurs within these mediated online communities and channels, and impression management is a key mechanism that it used to happen in interpersonal communication. I could read your signals and understand how you and I were relating, and then when it moved into these mediated experiences, it created a very interesting sort of triad of concerns between socializing, you having my device tethered to me so that it's always there, so that I can be extremely watchful over that device, because that's how I primarily use it, to make sure that I'm sort of staying in the loops with the people that I'm connected to, but also how sensitive I may be to privacy concerns in such a highly personal space. So it really is interesting to think about the sort of cyborg anthropology of people who live in both these real and mediated worlds at once.
It could be something as mundane. It doesn't even have to reach to the cyborg level. It could just be something as mundane as building up a longitudinal profile about what you're sharing in an online or mobile social context. Does that start to become an input for whether I give you insurance? Well, I got all these pictures of you with hot dogs. I'm not sure about giving you life insurance, or I know certain things about risky behavior you're engaging in, or financial decisions you're making in a social context, use of virtual currency. Does that impact whether I'm going to give you a credit card? How accountable are organizations to use of that profile data?
That's called transparency.
Yeah.
And it works both ways, because if you're getting a credit score and you're lying about your credit situation, the bank's going to get beaten up. And if the bank gets beaten up, they're going to have a higher rate, and you're going to pay the price for that on your premiums or your interest rate or something like that. So I think it works both ways, but we're probably ignoring the fact that biologically we've evolved to connect to each other. And the way that we connect to each other is to share things. So I don't think that this is so much a privacy issue as an understanding that this is the way beings are. And privacy is unfortunately not going to catch up to that. Like you said, we've got a long way to go. I don't think it'll catch up, because it'll just accelerate. The sharing will accelerate. And by the time you figured out the rules for Twitter, there'll be another social network. And by the time you figured out that, then there'll be something else. There'll be encoding or some kind of personalized, customized experience that we don't even have insights into. So we're kind of screwed.
I don't know. I think we need to go to the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So we got to be careful about how we treat consumers and be respectful of that, because ultimately the trust that we have with consumers is an asset, and we destroy that at our own peril.
So let's stretch that out a little bit. So it makes me think about, let's get back to sort of marketers, right? So we've talked a lot about now interpersonal sharing and community and what's happening in social and impacts around privacy and security of all that information. I wonder, particularly in the mobile case, we talked about downloading an application, let's say being a stronger opt-in, right? It's certainly a much stronger signal to that marketer or that application that you're interested, that you're willing to make that space in your life for that. So how do marketers appropriately take advantage of that? So it sort of brings me around to, we're thinking about how this is impacting us individually as people in our social circles, but how does a marketer play there? And I would imagine, therefore, that given that, let's say, higher level of opt-in and intimacy we can have with these devices, there should be opportunities for marketers to be a lot more successful. So I'd also ask you guys, what have you seen around, instead of it just being banner ads everywhere or TV ads, and I get up and go to the bathroom and come back, now it's, I've let it into the middle of my application. I'm maybe more likely to be, available if you give me the right kind of call to action. So what have we seen? When this stuff works, how well does it work?
Well, yeah. I just want to go back to one thing, which is that the platforms have got to get better about this, Apple and Android, Google with Android and others, because right now, because of technical limitations, when you install an app that has like push messaging capability as part of it, it asks you at the time of the installation, do you want to allow this app to message you? I don't really know if I want to do that right up front. I haven't seen what it's going to give. It would be much better to bring that up at a later topic when I've seen when I would love to give a marketer at least an opportunity to explain to me what kind of messages they're going to send to me, when they're going to send them, with what frequency, and make their case for why it would be important for me to have those.
This is why the White House came out with that Consumer Bill of Rights, and one of the pieces was respect the context. So, if you are about to have the user engage with you and speak into the microphone, ask them right then and there, tie it as closely as possible to the context. If you are a location-based app, obviously asking for permission to use location, it's endemic to you can't use the TV Guide app without entering your zip code so you can see the local TV listings. It's context in which people are sharing that data with the first-party data collector.
But it's not always obvious, why the app needs that. And I think there ought to be a framework within the app platforms to be able to have that honest conversation with the consumer at the right time.
And to a certain extent, Google Play does a decent job of right before you're downloading, providing a good laundry list and tries to summarize. But to your point, it's really at the time of download. They haven't even started up the app yet. They may not fully understand why. And you'll see all the time developers saying, hey, when you download this app, by the way, it's going to ask you for these things. It's going to ask you to access your contact list. I swear, this is the only reason why. You sort of have to dance around it rather than binding it more towards the context. But I think, Joel, you're sort of asking a question of, what actions, what can marketers really do with all this? And we were talking about this connected profile. We were talking about reaching these users and really understanding them, understanding more about them. And a lot of people may not realize the power you have as a marketer. If you have people coming to your app, to your mobile site, tablet-enabled site, PC website, if they are interacting and they are giving you information such as an email address, and you're going to communicate with them, and it's very clear why you need the email address. There's the proper context. You're communicating with them all the time. Most people don't realize you can go out and find those people based on that email address. You can find them, on mobile platforms. You can be very sensitive to it. You can anonymize and de-identify that email address, and you can bring these unique identifiers, these hashed emails, to a marketing platform and say, I'm not trying to plug JumpTap, but you can do this with a lot of folks these days, and you can say, find my users. Or I've just done a cookie sync here. I've cookied these users. I want to find them. I want to bring them back to my experience. And so, some people call them, Facebook calls it custom audience. There's custom segments. But ultimately, it is your users. You know them well. You want to make sure you protect that part of it and not just give it away to any platform out there. But, have those people come back again. And you can do it in a very privacy-sensitive way to make sure there's no personally identifiable information being shared.
So I'd like to answer your question with a pretty basic one for the audience, and that's, which of you have mobile sites? So that's opportunity number one, right? If you have an existing website, the next thing you need is either a mobile site or a responsive website that addresses the fact that most of your customers are online right now, and they're looking for you, and they're asking questions about you, and they're referring you. That's the basics. It's like, one of the top designers, a guy called Luke Wobieski, is constantly talking about getting registration and sign up and password. When you lose your password, getting that stuff, all the basics, getting that right. The first step here is just to have a presence online, and that's opportunity number one. And then opportunity number two is, well, these things are still new, like the notification settings. This is brand new for most companies. They haven't even figured out how to do it on the platforms, never mind how to do it with professional UX, UI companies. Those are the steps you need to take. You need to understand what it is that your user is going to be doing on that site, when they're going to be doing it, how they expect to have that interaction play out, and work with that. It's not a lofty goal right now. It's just taking advantage of the fact that there's this sea change, this rising tide, and dealing with that first. And then we can get into the real sophisticated stuff, like, following people around and doing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point, and for me, it sort of connects back up with my own thinking I've been doing recently around lean marketing, right? So at any moment in time, particularly because things are changing so much and so frequently, and we're learning so much as we go about how users are actually engaging in these distinct touch points. Have a single testable hypothesis, find a way to validate it, and keep moving forward. Makes it a lot easier to continue to iterate and proceed, and start to achieve real impact.
And it's cheap to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could literally get a web app or an app or a website designed in a mobile form in a couple of weeks, test it out, find out if it's going to work.
Right.
If it's a bomb, it's a bomb. Not the end of the world. But it's a couple of weeks of effort, and we're not talking about six-figure projects here.
Right.
So it is just after 4. We were hoping to take questions from the audience. So I'd love to open it up for questions right now for the panel. Anyone out there? Yes.
Curious if you could give an opinion on sort of the difference between going native, going sort of mobile app responsive design, and just doing an M. domain name sort of thing. There's a strategy to choose which one or the other, the investment it takes to go native.
I'll take a stab at this because it's a question I have to answer every single day. Well, it depends, right? It depends on what you're trying to do and who your consumer is and how you're going to reach them. Native apps, deep engagement. I mean, think about Angry Birds. We're talking about hours and hours of engagement, real, deep-seated relationship that you have with that thing. So if you're trying to do something where you need a very deep engagement and you need it to be up all the time and you need to be offline even when there's no connection, native, definitely. If you need to be there where a lot of people are at a lot of places and you're not quite sure which device they're going to be using, it's responsive. So in that case, or M-Dot, so in the project we did for Walgreens, they've got 35 million customers trying to reach them online every day. Right? Just a massive amount of people. There's no ways that they're going to have 80 different native apps to deliver what they need to that audience, because by the time they've delivered those apps, they're going to be obsolete. They're going to have to support them and redo them and upgrade them. It's just too expensive to do that. Where hybrid comes in is where you need some engagement, but you also need to make these lean marketing choices. So Walmart, not Walgreens, Walmart actually has a native app that has a HTML5 checkout process, which means that they can change the checkout process at any point without having to go back to the iTunes store or Google and say, hey, we've got another update. Can you just send that off to our customers? That's super irritating. But they can say, you know what, this part of the checkout's not working so well, or we can optimize this thing. Let's do that. But we still got the really cool deep engagement, the fast search, all the browsing functionality that comes from a native app. So it really depends on what it is that you're trying to do, how you're trying to reach them, and what the anticipation is on the user's end of what kind of experience they're going to have.
I just want to repeat something that came up earlier, which was the web is mostly about being discovered and getting found for driving awareness. And the native apps are really about driving loyalty for people you already have relationships with. A native app is not a substitute for a website.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. We ran this ad for Honda for their minivan, and it was this real immersive, loyal experience where the user can move their finger back and forth and rotate the minivan around. If you don't like the color, choose a different color and use your finger to repaint it. It's like building loyalty, allowing you to interact with the product right there and building that connection between the user and the brand. Well, so just if those who didn't hear the question, we were talking about privacy by disaster earlier, and my marketing team will definitely be speaking to me after this for bringing that up. But how's this all going to play out? The example was one charge, and you don't know if they've now got your credit card number, so you basically have to reissue, yourself a new Amex card. I think there is a whole world still waiting for the accountability of the use of your data, of your credit card number. And when the data gets passed around, it's that much harder to make sure people are accountable. If there is, this layer of protection or accountability there, that takes it to a whole new level. Very specifically, when we think about building profiles of users, we cleanse everything. We anonymize, we de-identify, we make sure that nothing personally identifiable comes into the platform, and then we're very aggressive about the limited shelf life of that data, really making sure we get it removed, and then it's all temporal in nature anyhow. But to solve your specific problem, at some point, it's almost like you would need a regenerating credit card number, which I think Citibank, some of them allow you to create these things, but God help the person who has to manage all that for themselves.
I'm just thinking, your situation, you're cleansing all your data, you're doing all the right things, but then this other operation doesn't, and leaves this really bad mark in people's mind about downloading apps, the danger of putting a credit card, giving any kind of information. How do you, because you say you do that, I don't know you really do that, you tell me you do that.
Yeah. Well, there's some aspect to this. JumpTap has a privacy policy. It is publicly accessible to everybody. And by stating that, the FTC has Section 5 of the Unfair Trade Practices, and it means say what you do and do what you say. So, part of us going through the process of putting out that privacy policy years ago was looking in the mirror and saying, okay, are we doing everything possible to, first of all, say what we do and do what we say, and also we, going to great lengths to protect against that. So if there is a bad actor out there, presumably they've put together some type of privacy policy, and the FTC can come along, and if they're in violation of the trade practices there, they're going to be fined. We saw this happen with Google. We've seen a lot of discussions between Facebook and the FTC around this. There are mechanisms out there. I get that they're not as clear-cut as, okay, you were caught speeding, so therefore, we have this speeding ticket. But I think there are mechanisms out there. And look, for the entire history of marketing, there have unfortunately been bad actors out there. They probably will continue to be that way, and to the degree to which people really are educating users, so you can, get those bad actors out of the system is good.
Go ahead.
That's a very good point. No, I was just going to quickly say Candy Crush Saga spends a ton of money promoting apps, but everybody already knows that they may not know King.com as a name, but they know Candy Crush Saga. Everyone plays it. They trust it. It is a trusted brand. Angry Birds is a trusted brand as well. And as a result, as a marketer, you don't have to spend as much to get to the top of the download rankings as a result of that. Jeff?
Well, I was going to say that as it relates to bad actors out there, that's one of the great things, for better or for worse, about the social world, is that the social media mob will name and shame people who are bad actors, and there's consequences associated with that in a transparent universe. So there's bad stuff that can happen with that too, with the mob,
cyberbullying
and other things. But you're not going to be able to get away with it for long.
The industry meaning the marketing industry as a whole?
Yes, in terms of implementing these types of experiences, particularly in mobile.
With regards to privacy, or?
How far along are we? No.
Oh, the best practices we've been talking about.
Can we have negative marks?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, the industry wants to think of itself as, 7 to 8, and the reality is it's a 2. I mean, you can't possibly invest in all of these areas. Mobile is still, we see this all the time. Marketers come to us and they say, here's my PC budget, here's my mobile budget. When I buy my PC budget, it's quicker. The tools are, it's all standardized. I know what I'm getting. I got my DFA tags. Everything's running. It's easy. It's done. Mobile's fragmented. You got mobile web. You got app. You have Android. You've got iOS. And we think very highly of our ability to simplify for that. But at the same time, you can't invest in all of these areas. So you may go for understanding the user and more in-depth profile, but then you've got to invest in the rich media piece. You may develop a mobile web experience, but it costs a lot more to develop a full-blown app that's going to match your branded experience. So I'd say it's a 2, but it's not anybody's fault. I mean, nobody can do all those things, and especially if you have to care for a PC experience, a desktop experience, and you've got to invest in a mobile experience. Mobile still, it's growing very fast, but it's still not big enough to invest in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point in terms of, there's sort of the change management within your own strategies. So we've indicated a number of times of just how shifting the landscape is right now and how important it is, again, to stay lean and have a very, I think, singular testable hypothesis at any moment in time. I repeat that often, so I repeated it a couple times here. It's fine. But, I think it really, comes down to that, to being able to sort of, again, map to the best of your capabilities, map that customer's experience across all these different touch points, and in a sense, sort of reconsider the elements of your sort of classic or more traditional brand strategies against those specific touch points, and go as far as you can to try and develop a deeper understanding of the user scenario, so some of the qualitative side of things, and absolutely embracing the quantitative as well. In the product design world within which I live, hybrid models work best for me and my team in terms of staying lean, staying focused, and continuing to march forward. So I think it's a pretty low grade today. I think that there's a lot of very good very, very good excuses for that, and very heavy challenges in front of us that sort of makes it that way. But I see a lot of upside in terms of the ability to sort of work through all this change and get to a pretty good place.
I give the industry as a whole probably C minus grades, but there are some A performers out there, and I think the 80-20 rule applies. Some really basic things aren't being done, and people tend to make it too complex. I mean, prescription, go home, get an agency, get a mobile website like this month, and then challenge your web team to figure out, to come to you with a proposal for a responsive design site and see if you can buy into what they bring you and if you can afford it. And if you haven't had a great idea for an app yet, don't stress about it until you do have a great idea for an app, and then stress about whether you're going to execute well. But otherwise, don't worry about it. And a lot of companies just aren't even doing those things, basically, and therefore they're way off track.
Yeah, for all of those of you in the audience who did not raise your hand when asked if you have a mobile site, if you're a marketer, you really should. Call Blue Train Mobile, call anybody in the Boston area, just get something up and running, because more and more your users are moving over to mobile, and you could be an architect. I mean, you could be anybody, right? And users are moving their media consumption experience over to mobile. They're moving it faster and faster, this year than they were last year. And last year, if people had 20% of their user base in mobile, this year it's over 50%. I mean, it's insane how fast it's happening.
Richard, final moment.
I think you got my onside.
Final grade.
It's 0 right now.
Wow. Okay, so we learned a lot. Most importantly, that the industry is early on. So hopefully this was eye-opening and insightful. And Thanks to the panel for your participation.